I went to close my ex-husband's dead bank account. The banker's hands started shaking when the screen loaded. There was $14,822,619.2037 sitting in a trust I had never heard of, and the man whose signature was on the paperwork updating that trust 6 weeks earlier had been dead for 2 years. Good day, listeners. It's Diane here. Before I continue, like and subscribe and leave your comment. My name is Diane Marlowe. I was 47 years old, and I lived in a rented 2-bedroom on Sylvania Avenue in Toledo, Ohio, in a beige brick building with a parking lot that flooded every spring. I drove a 2014 Honda CR-V with 161,000 miles on it and a check engine light that had been on so long I'd stopped seeing it. I worked as a medical billing coder at Mercy Health St. Vincent, in a cubicle on the 3rd floor with a photo of my daughter Kayla taped to the divider, and a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Employee," which my coworker Denise had given me as a joke that had aged into a kind of quiet truth. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I was not a woman waiting for a windfall. I had $2,317 in checking, a 401k that had taken a beating in 2022 and never fully recovered, and a daughter, Kayla Marlowe, 22, in her 2nd year of the nursing program at Owens Community College, whose tuition I covered $347 a month at a time on a payment plan I'd set up myself, in person, because I didn't trust automated systems with money I didn't have. I'd been divorced from Richard Voss for 11 years. We married young at 24, back when he was finishing his engineering degree at the University of Toledo, and I was working the front desk at a dental office on Monroe Street. Richard was smart in a quiet, absorbed way, the kind of smart that looked like distraction to people who didn't know him. He'd sit at the kitchen table with graph paper and a mechanical pencil for hours, sketching things I didn't understand, humming under his breath. He got a job at a mid-size manufacturing firm called Ottawa Precision Components in 2003, doing design work on hydraulic fittings, and for 15 years that was simply what Richard did. Steady. Unremarkable. A man who packed the same turkey sandwich every day and drove a Ford Taurus until the transmission gave out. We divorced in 2015, amicably, or as amicably as these things go. No children together besides Kayla, who was already 16 and mostly raised. We just drifted, the way some marriages do, into 2 people sharing a house and very little else. He moved to an apartment in Perrysburg. I kept the house until I couldn't afford it anymore. We stayed cordial. He came to Kayla's high school graduation. He sent birthday cards with $20 bills folded inside every year, until he died of a heart attack in his sleep in March of 2024 at 56, alone in that Perrysburg apartment, found 3 days later by a neighbor who noticed his newspapers piling up. I want to plant something here, because it mattered later, even though at the time I didn't think twice about it. In the last 2 years of his life, Richard called me more than he had in the previous 9 combined. Not long calls, 5 minutes, sometimes less, and always about nothing. Asking how Kayla's nursing program was going. Asking, once out of nowhere, whether I still had the storage unit we'd shared during the divorce, the one on Airport Highway. I told him no, I'd given it up in 2019. He said, "Okay, good," in a tone that didn't match the words, like it wasn't good at all. The second thing. At his funeral, which was small, maybe 20 people at a funeral home on Reynolds Road, his younger brother Gary Voss gave a eulogy that struck me as strange, even as I sat there half listening, still stunned by the fact of him being gone. Gary talked about Richard's quiet success and his smart decisions with money in a way that felt oddly specific for a man everyone had always described, affectionately, as broke and frugal. I remember glancing at Kayla, and she'd raised an eyebrow at me too, so I knew I hadn't imagined it. The third thing, the smallest thing, the thing I nearly forgot entirely, was a woman named Paula Voss standing near the back of the funeral home, whom Gary introduced to me as Richard's wife. I didn't know Richard had remarried. Kayla didn't know either. Paula was maybe 50, put together in a navy blazer, and she shook my hand with a grip that felt less like grief and more like an assessment, the way you'd size up competition before a negotiation you hadn't announced yet. I filed all 3 of those things away the way you file away odd things at a funeral, as grief fog, as things that don't quite add up because nothing adds up when someone dies. I had no idea, sitting in that folding chair in March of 2024, that I was looking at the first 3 threads of something that would take over the next year of my life. I should say a little more about who I was in those years, because it matters for understanding how slow I was to notice any of this. I was not a suspicious person. I balanced my checkbook on Sunday nights with a calculator and a pen, the old-fashioned way, and I trusted the people in my life roughly as much as they gave me reason to. My own mother, Evelyn, who lived 40 minutes away in Bowling Green and called me every Sunday afternoon like clockwork, used to tease me for being the most predictable woman in Lucas County. Same route to work, same grocery store on Saturdays, same 3 restaurants on rotation for Kayla's birthday dinners. I liked my life small. I liked knowing what was coming. Richard's death had already knocked a hole in that predictability, and I think some part of me in the months after simply didn't have room to go looking for more disruption. I grieved him the way you grieve someone you loved once and still respected, quietly on my own schedule, mostly in the car on the way to work, where nobody could see my face. It was a Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025, 15 months after Richard's funeral, when I finally got around to a piece of paperwork I'd been putting off. During the divorce, Richard and I had kept one small joint business account open at Fifth Third Bank, a leftover from a doomed attempt in 2011 to start a side business reselling machined parts online. The account had maybe $40 in it and hadn't been touched in years. I'd gotten a letter from the bank in May saying the account was flagged for dormancy review, and since my name was still on it, I needed to come in with ID to either activate it or close it. I went on my lunch break in my scrubs-adjacent work clothes, expecting to be in and out in 15 minutes. I sat down across from a banker named Todd Ashworth, a guy maybe 30, with a lanyard and a laminated name badge, who pulled up the account on his screen with the bored efficiency of someone who does 40 of these a day. "Okay, Ms. Marlowe, let's see what we've got here," he said, typing. Then he stopped typing. I remember the exact quality of the silence that followed, not long, maybe 4 seconds, but it had a texture to it, the texture of someone recalibrating. "I'm sorry, can you give me just a second?" Todd said, and turned his monitor slightly away from me, which is not something bank employees usually do with a joint account holder sitting right there. "Is something wrong with it?" I asked. No, nothing's wrong, it's just..." He picked up his desk phone and dialed an extension. "Hey, it's Todd at branch 0442. I've got a dormant account here that's showing a linked fiduciary relationship, and I need someone from Trust Services to walk me through the disclosure before I..." Yeah, I'll hold." I sat there for 6 minutes while he held the phone against his shoulder, not making eye contact with me, tapping his pen against a legal pad. When he finally hung up, he turned the monitor back toward me, slower this time, like he was bracing me for something. "So," he said, "this account, the old joint account, it's linked, through your ex-husband's social security number, to a trust account that was opened in 2019. It's called the HCH Family Trust, because your name is still listed as a contingent authorized party on the original 2011 account documentation, and because that link was never formally severed after your divorce, the system is showing you have visibility into some of this." "Some of what?" He turned the monitor toward me fully. The number on the screen was $14,822,619.37. I want to describe exactly what happened in my body, because I've thought about it so many times since. My hands went cold first. Actually cold, like I'd stepped outside in February. Then my ears started ringing, faintly, a high, thin tone. I read the number 3 times. I counted the digits with my finger against my leg under the desk, like a kid checking their math. $14,822,619.37. "That can't be right," I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected. "I can't discuss the full details of a trust I'm not authorized to disclose fully," Todd said, clearly reciting something, clearly also a little rattled himself. "But because of the historical linkage, I am required to inform you that you're named, not as trustee, but you're named somewhere in the trust documentation. You'd need to speak with our Trust and Estates Department, or honestly with an attorney, to get the full picture. I'm not really equipped to explain more than that. Whose trust is this?" He looked at the screen again. It was established by Richard A. Voss, and it was amended. He scrolled, frowning. "Amended April 14th, 2025, I said. "Richard Voss died in March of 2024. Todd's face did something I will never forget. He went very still and very pale, and he looked at the screen again like it might have changed. That document is dated April of this year," he said. "It has an electronic signature on it dated April 14th, 2025, 14 months after Richard died. Someone had signed his name to an amendment to a trust worth nearly $15 million, more than a year after he was in the ground at Toledo Memorial Park. I don't remember leaving the bank. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot on Central Avenue for 40 minutes, engine off, both hands on the wheel like I was driving somewhere, going nowhere. I didn't call Kayla. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there and let the number rearrange itself over and over in my head. 14,822,000, and underneath it, quieter, a second fact that scared me more than the money did. Somebody, somewhere, was still signing Richard's name. I didn't go back to work that afternoon. I called Denise and told her I had a family emergency, which wasn't exactly a lie. I drove home and sat at my kitchen table, the same cheap oak table Richard and I had bought at a Big Lots in 2002. And I made a list, because that's what I do when I'm scared. I've made lists my whole life. Grocery lists, bill lists, lists of things Kayla needed before her first semester of clinicals. This list had 3 columns: what I know, what I don't know, who I can trust. Under what I know, I wrote, Richard had money nobody knew about. A trust exists. Someone signed his name after he died. Gary gave a strange eulogy. Paula exists, and I never knew about her. Under what I don't know, I wrote almost everything else. Under who I can trust, I sat for a long time before I wrote anything, and then I wrote just one name, Kayla. Because whatever this was, it touched her too. She was Richard's daughter. Whatever else had happened between me and him, I thought about that storage unit. The one Richard had asked me about out of nowhere 2 years before he died. Do you still have the storage unit on Airport Highway? At the time, I'd thought it was a strange, almost sentimental question, an old man remembering old things. Sitting at that kitchen table with the number 14,822,619.37 running behind my eyes, it didn't feel sentimental anymore. It felt like a man checking whether a door was still open. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed doing math I had no information to complete. If Richard had this money, where had it come from on an engineer's salary on a man who drove a Taurus until the transmission died? And if he'd had it, why hadn't he told me? Told Kayla, told anyone, and if someone was still signing his name over a year after his death, that meant whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was ongoing. Active. Someone right now, tonight, was managing money that belonged, at least on paper, partly to a dead man. I decided 2 things before I fell asleep around 4 a.m. I would not tell Gary or Paula that I knew anything, and I would not do this alone. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a personal day. I told my supervisor, a tired, kind woman named Carol Petrosky, that I had a medical appointment, which felt like the smallest lie in a week suddenly full of much bigger unknowns. I need to say here that this mattered more than it might sound. Mercy Health had announced in April that billing was being partially outsourced to a third-party vendor, and 11 of us on the 3rd floor were already living with the knowledge that our jobs might not exist by Christmas. Taking a day off, even a lie about a day off, felt like a risk I couldn't really afford. I took it anyway. I didn't use my home Wi-Fi. I don't fully know why instinct, maybe some half-remembered true crime podcast logic, but it felt important that whatever I searched, whatever I looked up, wasn't tied to my name and my router. I drove to the downtown branch of the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library on Michigan Street and sat at one of the public computers with a legal pad and a stack of quarters for the printer. I searched Richard A. Voss Ottawa Precision Components Patent. And there it was, 3 results from a patent aggregator site filed between 2009 and 2014. All under Richard's name, all assigned to Ottawa Precision Components at the time of filing. Standard employment agreement stuff, I assumed. Except one of them, filed in 2013, a fitting design for high-pressure hydraulic hose couplings had been cited over the following decade in 11 other patents filed by 3 different major manufacturing companies, including one very large one I recognized because they made parts for John Deere. I didn't understand patent law. I understood, standing in a public library at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, that if a patent gets cited and licensed enough times by big enough companies, it can generate royalty income for years, sometimes decades, long after the original inventor has moved on to something else entirely or died. That afternoon, I called a number I'd found through a friend of Denise's, Renata Cho, an estate and trust attorney with a small firm off Secor Road. I almost hung up twice before she answered. Renata Cho, she said, in the clipped voice of someone mid-sip of something. I found out later it was cold brew. She drank it constantly in a giant insulated tumbler that never seemed to leave her hand. And she told me once, dead serious, that she'd quit caffeine pills in law school because the shakes made my handwriting illegible during exams, and cold brew doesn't do that. I told her everything, fast, probably not in order. She let me finish and then said, "Okay, first, don't panic and don't confront anyone. Second, I need you to come in tomorrow with anything you have. The account paperwork, Richard's obituary, anything with Gary Voss's or Paula Voss's name on it. Third, and I want you to actually hear this part, if there's $15 million and somebody's forging a dead man's signature, this is not a 2-hour consultation. This is a case. Are you ready for that?" I said I didn't know. She said, "Good, honest answer. Come in tomorrow." Renata turned out to be exactly what I needed. Sharp, unsentimental, and very funny in a dry way that got me through some of the worst weeks of my life. She kept a small dry erase board in her office that just said "Bill before feelings" as a joke to herself, and she was, I came to learn, one of the few people in Lucas County who specialized in exactly this kind of tangled trust and estate mess. Over the following 6 weeks, working with Renata and a forensic accountant she brought in named Priya Nair, the shape of it started to emerge in layers, the way these things always do, never all at once, always one document leading to the next. Layer 1, Richard hadn't just had a patent. Starting in 2016, 2 years before our divorce was even finalized, he'd begun receiving quarterly royalty checks, first small, a few $1,000s, then larger, as more companies licensed the coupling design. By 2020, those checks were averaging $180,000 a quarter. He'd never touched our joint accounts with a dime of it. Instead, in 2019, he'd formed an LLC, Halden Cove Holdings, named, we eventually learned, after a lake in Michigan where his family used to vacation when he was a kid, and funneled every royalty check into it. Layer 2. In 2021, Halden Cove Holdings had been used to establish the HCH Family Trust with Richard as grantor. The original 2021 trust documents, which Renata subpoenaed from the trust's registered agent, named Kayla Marlowe as sole primary beneficiary, with me named as successor trustee in the event Richard became incapacitated or died before Kayla turned 25. That was the real Richard, quiet, private, taking care of his daughter in the only language he seemed to know how to speak, which was numbers on paper, not conversation. Layer 3, the one that took the longest to surface, the April 2025 amendment. The one signed 14 months after Richard was dead. Priya Nair, the forensic accountant, spent almost 3 weeks tracing the IP address and device metadata attached to the electronic signature platform the trust's attorney of record had used. It traced back to a law office in Sylvania. Not Richard's original estate attorney, but a different one. A small operation run by a man named Dale Pruitt, whom, it turned out, Gary Voss had hired directly in February of 2025. Layer 4, and this was the gotcha moment, the one Renata called the whole case in one email. Priya found, through a subpoena of Dale Pruitt's firm's records, an email chain from March 2025 between Gary Voss and Dale Pruitt. In it, Gary wrote, and I remember the exact words because Renata read them out loud to me in her office with her eyebrows raised. Paula has the flash drive with his old signature file from the 2019 refinance paperwork that should work fine for the new trustee doc. Nobody at the bank checks these things closely. Dale Pruitt had replied simply, "Understood," sending the amendment for Paula's signature as co-trustee Monday. Gary Voss and Paula Voss, Richard's brother and the second wife I hadn't known existed, had used an old scanned signature from a 6-year-old refinance document to forge an amendment to the trust, removing Kayla as sole beneficiary and installing Paula as co-trustee alongside Gary, with a new distribution schedule that funneled 60% of the trust's assets to trustee administrative discretion, meaning, functionally, to themselves. We also learned through Priya's digging into old county marriage records that Paula Voss's marriage to Richard was real. They'd married quietly at the Lucas County Courthouse in September of 2023, 6 months before he died. But that Richard, according to Renata's reading of the original 2021 trust documents, had never updated the trust to reflect the marriage, which meant Paula had no independent legal claim to the trust's assets whatsoever. Her only route in was through forgery, alongside Gary. It was around week 5 of the investigation, in mid-July, that the pressure started. Gary Voss showed up, uninvited, at my apartment on Sylvania Avenue on a Thursday evening while I was making dinner. I saw his SUV, a newer Chevy Tahoe, the kind of vehicle a man buys when he wants people to notice he's stopped struggling, pull into the flooded parking lot, and my stomach dropped before he'd even gotten out. He didn't come in. He stood on the little concrete landing outside my door, and he was calm, almost friendly, which somehow made it worse. "Diane," he said, "I heard you've been asking around about Richard's affairs. I just want to say families should handle family things as a family. Lawyers get expensive and messy, and honestly, nobody wants Kayla dragged through something ugly in probate court. Wouldn't it be easier if we just sat down, the three of us, Paula and me, and worked something out directly? A number that's fair to everyone?" I told him, as evenly as I could, that any conversation about Richard's estate needed to go through my attorney. He smiled, a smile with no warmth in it at all, and said, "Sure, of course. Just think about what a long court fight does to a family. Think about Kayla having to sit through depositions instead of finishing school." Then he left. I called Renata the second his taillights cleared the lot. She was quiet for a second and then said, "That's not a friendly visit, Diane. That's a soft threat, and I want it in the file. Write down everything he said, word for word, right now while it's fresh, and don't respond to any further contact except through me." 2 weeks later, a formal letter arrived from Dale Pruitt's office, not to me, but to Renata, threatening a competing probate filing that would challenge my standing as successor trustee and request an emergency freeze on the trust's assets pending resolution of conflicting fiduciary claims, which Renata told me flatly was legal language for "we're going to try to tie this up in court long enough to wear you down or run you out of money for lawyers." That threat landed at the worst possible time. In August, Mercy Health finalized the outsourcing decision. My position, along with 4 others on the 3rd floor, was eliminated effective October 1st with 12 weeks of severance. I sat in Carol Petrosky's office, and she cried more than I did, actually, which I remember finding strange and touching at the same time. I didn't tell her about the trust. I didn't tell almost anyone. I told Kayla, finally, in late August, sitting on her dorm room bed at Owens, and she cried too, but for a different reason. She said, "He was thinking about me the whole time and never said anything," and I didn't have a good answer for that because I'd been wondering the same thing about myself for 2 months. So there I was by September, unemployed in 6 weeks, a daughter's tuition due, a legal fight against 2 people willing to forge a dead man's signature, and $14 million sitting in a trust that a judge hadn't yet said was mine or Kayla's or anyone's. There was a stretch in mid-September, about 3 weeks after the layoff notice, when I nearly folded. Renata called it the wobble, and told me almost every client of hers who ends up winning has one. Mine came on a Sunday night when I sat down to actually do the math on legal fees so far, $34,000 already, most of it billed against future trust proceeds, but Renata was clear that if we lost, I could be personally on the hook for a portion of it. I called her at 9 at night, which I'd never done before, and told her maybe we should just take whatever number Gary was offering and be done with it. Get Kayla's tuition covered, walk away from the rest. Renata didn't yell at me or try to talk me out of it with big speeches. She just said, "Diane, I want you to picture Kayla at 35, finding out on her own, from a stray comment at some family gathering, that her father built something for her and 2 people erased her name from it with a stolen signature, and that you had the evidence in your hands and folded because it felt too big. Sit with that for one night. Call me tomorrow either way, and whatever you decide, I'll still represent you." I sat with it. I called her back at 7 a.m. and said, "We're not folding." And she said, "Good, I already told Priya to keep pulling the bank records," which told me she'd never really doubted I'd come back around. That same week, Priya Nair found something that widened the whole picture. Digging through 5 years of Halden Cove Holdings bank statements subpoenaed from a credit union in Perrysburg, she noticed a pattern of quarterly withdrawals, not deposits, withdrawals of exactly $4,000, made every 3 months starting in January 2023, more than a year before Richard died, each one wired to an account ending in 66112. It took her another week to trace that account back to Gary Voss. He wasn't just forging documents after Richard died, Priya told me, and Renata spreading 3 years of statements across the conference table like a hand of cards. He'd been getting money out of this LLC while Richard was alive, quietly in amounts small enough that Richard might not have noticed, or might have written off as a loan to his brother. That detail changed something for me. It meant this hadn't started as opportunism after a funeral. It had started while Richard was still breathing, still humming over graph paper somewhere, unaware or maybe half-aware and too conflict-averse to confront his own brother about it. Renata subpoenaed Gary's financial records going back further and found a consistent pattern of debt. 2 failed business ventures in the 2010s, a home equity line maxed out by 2021, a car repossession in early 2022 that Gary had never mentioned to a single person in the family, a fact even Kayla, who'd grown up with an Uncle Gary at every Thanksgiving, had no idea about. I want to be honest about something here because it's part of the story too. Learning all this didn't just make me angry at Gary. It made me sad for Richard, in a way I hadn't expected. He'd built something careful and private for his daughter, and the whole time, quietly, someone he trusted had been chipping small pieces off the edge of it, and he'd either never noticed or never had the heart to stop it. I thought about that phone call 2 years before he died. "Do you still have the storage unit?" And I wondered, for the first time, whether Richard had been more worried about Gary than he ever let on. Whether that odd little question had been him checking whether there was anywhere safe left to put things. By early October, we had what Renata called the full architecture of the case. The original 2021 trust naming Kayla, the pattern of Gary's withdrawals from Halden Cove Holdings while Richard was alive, the March 2025 email about the flash drive, the forged April 2025 amendment, and Priya's metadata tracing the signature file to a device belonging to Paula. Renata laid it all out for me on a single legal pad in her handwriting, a straight chronological line from 2019 to now, and said, "This isn't circumstantial anymore, Diane. This is a documented pattern. I've been doing this 17 years, and cases this clean don't come along often. We're not settling for less than full restoration of the original trust terms." Renata, to her credit, never let the size of the number distract her from the size of the evidence. "We don't need drama," she told me once, tapping her bill before feelings bored with her pen. "We need the email, the metadata, and the marriage records. Juries and judges love a forged signature almost as much as they hate people who forge them. This is a paperwork case. We're going to win it with paperwork." The mediation was set for November 12, 2025, at Renata's request, before it escalated to a full probate court hearing, a private conference room on the 4th floor of a law office on Adams Street, with a retired judge, Harold Beecham, brought in as a neutral mediator. I wore the one blazer I owned that still fit right navy, bought for Kayla's high school graduation 8 years earlier. Renata sat beside me with a folder 2 inches thick and her tumbler of cold brew, which she set down on the table with the deliberate calm of someone who'd done this 100 times. Gary Voss came in with Dale Pruitt. Paula Voss sat beside them, in the same kind of assessing posture I remembered from the funeral, though it looked thinner now, more brittle, like a coat of paint stretched too far. Judge Beecham opened with procedural formalities, and then Renata asked to present what she called a threshold issue regarding the validity of the April 2025 amendment, and the room went very still. "Your Honor," Renata said, "I have here forensic metadata from the e-signature platform used to execute the April 14th amendment, showing the signature file was uploaded from a device registered to Paula Voss, using a signature image extracted from a 2019 mortgage refinance document, a document executed while Richard Voss was alive and entirely unrelated to any 2025 transaction." She slid copies across the table. "I also have an email, dated March 11, 2025, from Gary Voss to Dale Pruitt, referencing, and I'm quoting directly, Paula's flash drive with his old signature file." Dale Pruitt's face didn't move, but his hand resting on the table went very still, fingers flat against the wood like he was bracing it. Gary Voss looked at him, a fast, sideways glance, barely half a second, and Pruitt did not look back. "Mr. Voss," Judge Beecham said, "do you have a response to this evidence?" Gary's jaw worked once before he spoke. "That email is being taken out of context," he said. "Paula had general authority to assist with digitizing old documents for the estate. Richard Voss died in March of 2024. Renata said quietly, evenly, not raising her voice at all. "There is no version of assisting with the estate that involves signing his name to a legal document 13 months after his death. Your Honor, this isn't a gray area. This is forgery of a deceased grantor's signature on a trust instrument, and I'd remind the court that Ohio Revised Code treats that as a felony offense independent of any civil probate outcome." Paula Voss's composed posture finally cracked, not dramatically, just a long exhale, her shoulders dropping half an inch, her eyes going somewhere on the table that wasn't any of our faces. Judge Beecham asked for a 15-minute recess, and I stepped out into the hallway with Renata, my legs a little unsteady in a way I hadn't expected. "You did great," she said, handing me a bottle of water from her bag like she'd known I'd need it. "You didn't say a word, and that was exactly right. Let them talk themselves into a corner. When we came back, Dale Pruitt spoke first, before Gary or Paula could say anything. Gary's chair scraped slightly against the floor as he shifted his weight, and I noticed his hands, which had been folded neatly on the table an hour earlier, were now pressed flat against his thighs, out of sight, the way people hide their hands when they don't trust them to stay still. Given the documentation presented, he said, choosing each word like it might explode, my clients would like to explore a resolution that does not require further examination of the amendment's validity in open court. I stayed quiet through most of it, the way Renata and I had agreed I would beforehand. You don't need to perform anything in there, she'd told me that morning. You don't need to cry. You don't need to yell. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone. Let the paperwork do what paperwork does. I sat with my hands folded on the table, and I watched a man who had stood on my doorstep 2 months earlier, talking about family and fairness, go quiet and gray-faced across a conference table, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel, which was not triumph, exactly. It was more like relief settling into my chest for the first time in 5 months. The settlement, finalized on December 3, 2025, restored the original 2021 trust terms in full, Kayla Marlowe as sole primary beneficiary of the HCH Family Trust, with me confirmed as sole successor trustee, managing the assets on her behalf until she turned 25, at which point full control would transfer to her directly. The April 2025 amendment was voided in its entirety by court order. Gary Voss and Paula Voss withdrew all competing claims to the trust and, as part of the settlement, agreed to a consent judgment acknowledging the forged signature, which Renata insisted on in writing, specifically so that if either of them ever tried anything like this again, there'd be a paper trail a mile long waiting for them. Dale Pruitt was referred to the Ohio Supreme Court's Disciplinary Council for his role in preparing and filing the amendment. I heard later through Renata that he surrendered his law license rather than fight the complaint. The trust itself, after 5 months of accrued royalties and Prionaires accounting, had grown to $15,114,011 by the time of settlement. Legal fees, Renata's, Priya's, the court costs, came to just under $211,000, paid directly out of trust assets per the judge's order, which meant none of it came out of my pocket or Kayla's inheritance beyond what the trust itself absorbed. I called Kayla from the parking garage on Adams Street before I'd even reached my car. She was in the middle of a clinical rotation and picked up anyway, breathless, and I just said, "It's over. It's yours. It's really yours." And she was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. And then she said very softly, "Dad did this, not as a question." The first thing I did with any of it before a single other purchase was pay off Kayla's remaining tuition balance in full $6,840 in person at the Owens College Bursar's office, the same way I'd made every partial payment for 2 years, except this time I didn't need a payment plan. The second thing I did was sign the final trustee paperwork Renata's office prepared, 31 pages at her conference table, with her cold brew tumbler sitting between us like a strange little witness to the whole thing. It's been a year and a half now as I'm telling you this. I want to walk you through where everyone ended up, because I think that matters as much as the money did. Kayla finished her nursing program in May of 2026, top of her cohort, and she's working now in the cardiac unit at ProMedica Toledo Hospital, a job she chose herself on her own merit, before she ever touched $1 of the trust beyond her tuition. She bought a modest 3-bedroom house in Sylvania with cash in the fall, and she still, to my quiet amusement, drives a used Corolla she bought 2 years ago and refuses to replace because she says it runs fine. I see a lot of Richard in that particular stubbornness. I didn't quit working entirely, though I could have. I left medical billing behind. No hard feelings toward Mercy Health, but that chapter closed itself. And I used a portion of the trust, with Kayla's blessing, since she was already 23 by then and involved in every decision, to open a small nonprofit consulting service that helps working-class families navigate exactly the kind of confusing estate and trust paperwork that nearly buried me. We call it the Riverside Legal Access Project, 3 staff. 1 part-time, operating out of a small office on Monroe Street, not far from where I used to work the dental front desk at 22 years old. Renata Cho sits on our small advisory board and still refuses to let anyone schedule meetings with her before 10 a.m. on principle. Renata's practice grew after our case. Word travels in a legal community, and a few other families found their way to her with their own tangled inheritances. though she swears none have topped mine for sheer audacity. She moved her office last spring from the small suite off Secor Road to a slightly bigger space above a bakery on Monroe Street, 3 doors down from the nonprofit, mostly, I think, so she can walk over and steal coffee from our break room and complain about her new landlord. Priya Nair now works with us part-time doing forensic reviews for the nonprofit. Still meticulous, still the kind of person who reads a bank statement the way other people read a novel, and she brought on a second analyst last winter because the caseload had grown past what one person could manage alone. Gary Voss lost his job at the manufacturing firm where he'd worked for 20 years. Not directly because of our case, but his employer, a family-owned company, found out about the felony referral through local court records and quietly let him go the following spring, citing trust concerns, which I found almost darkly funny given the circumstances. I heard through a cousin who still speaks to him that he moved to Michigan and works in inventory management now, and that his relationship with the rest of the extended family has never really recovered. Richard's aunt, an 81-year-old woman named Dorothy who still sends me a Christmas card every year, told me flatly at a family gathering last December that she hasn't spoken to Gary since the settlement and doesn't plan to. Paula Voss, as far as I know, moved out of the area entirely sometime in 2026, back to Indiana, where I understand she has family. I've had no contact with her since the settlement, and I don't intend to seek any. Dale Pruitt, the attorney who prepared the forged amendment, surrendered his law license rather than fight the disciplinary complaint, and last I heard he was doing paralegal work for a firm in Findlay under someone else's supervision. A small, quiet consequence, but a real one. Denise, my old coworker from Mercy Health, still texts me every couple of months, mostly just to say hello, and I had her and Carol Petrosky, my old supervisor, over for dinner at the new house this spring. Carol cried again a little when she saw the place, not out of sadness this time, she said, just relief that things had turned out okay for someone after a year when so much at that hospital had gone the other way for so many people. I still think about the 11 of us who lost our jobs that October, and I made sure when I set up the Riverside Legal Access Project that Carol knew the door was always open if she ever wanted a second career doing something that mattered to her the way billing never quite did. I sat on my back porch a few weeks ago. I bought a small house myself, finally, a modest brick 2-bedroom not far from Kayla's, nothing extravagant, just mine, with a cup of coffee, watching the last of the summer light go orange over the yard, and I thought about something I hadn't expected to land on. I used to think the lesson of all this would be about money. It isn't, not really. The lesson is that the people who love us quietly, the ones who show it through numbers on a page instead of words out loud, are still telling us something. You just have to be patient enough and brave enough to go looking for what they meant. If you're listening to this tonight, folding laundry or driving home, or lying in bed with the lights off, I hope you hear this part especially. You don't have to be loud to be strong. Diane Marlowe from Toledo, Ohio, spent 5 months being quiet, methodical, and patient while 2 people tried to steal what belonged to her daughter. And patience is what won. Not anger, not revenge, just paperwork and time, and refusing to be rushed into a decision that wasn't hers to rush? What would you have done in my position? Fought quietly through the courts, or confronted them the moment they showed up at your door? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story kept you company tonight, do me a favor and hit subscribe so I can keep telling you these stories next week.